Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty fascinating, the Dallas Cowboys
A
cheerleaders.
very all-American topic.
It is, but we're going to be going kind of beyond the surface. Everyone's familiar with the iconic uniforms and the whole presentation, but we're going to be using a really interesting mix of sources for this one.
Yeah, we've got some academic papers,
Mhm.
some cultural critiques, and even a few personal accounts from some former cheerleaders.
Yeah, so we're really trying to get into all the different layers of
Yeah.
this. So what are we hoping to learn today? What's the big mission here with this deep dive?
Well, I think we really want to unpack how the DIC evolved over time.
Hmm.
The realities of actually being a cheerleader versus the kind of image that's presented. And then kind of bigger picture what this whole phenomenon tells us about American culture.
Yeah, what's going on beneath the surface. So let's start with that image. That very carefully cultivated image of the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. The all-American sweetheart, the wholesome Americana. But then we look at some of these sources, these analyses, and some of these personal accounts, and it's a bit of a different picture, isn't it?
Yeah, there's this tension that emerges between that very constructed image and then the reality. Some of these academic sources really get into the nitty-gritty of the financial side of things, and it's pretty shocking, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, did you know that their contracts, they don't even have the same basic benefits that a lot of professional performers have?
Really?
And the pay. Let's just say it's not exactly like a path to financial security.
Hmm. Wow. That is surprising.
Yeah, there's this real disconnect between the glamour and the actual, economic realities.
Yeah, like a whole world behind the curtain. Speaking of image, did you know that trainees are given these dolls
Oh, yeah, the
that are
dolls.
supposed to represent the ideal DCC?
Yeah.
What's up with that?
It's interesting, right? Because you have the DCC, and they've had diverse members for decades now. But these dolls, they only come in white,
Really?
with either blonde or brunette hair.
That's interesting. Huh. So you have this real emphasis on diversity on the squad.
Mm-hmm.
But then the ideal image, at least the one that they're giving to their trainees, remains very white.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast.
Why do you think that is?
Well, at the end of the day, the DCC is a business,
Right.
and
Yeah.
businesses are about selling a product.
Yeah.
And in this case, the product is an image,
An image.
and that image has been very specifically tied to a certain look.
That makes sense. And it's not just about race either. This whole idea of the duality of femininity.
Oh, absolutely.
They have to be innocent and wholesome, but also incredibly sexy.
Yeah, they're constantly walking this tightrope, and you see it in everything from their uniforms to the choreography.
Yeah, the uniforms, they're often in red, white, and blue, very patriotic colors.
Evoking that classic Americana.
Exactly.
Mm.
But they're also incredibly revealing.
Oh, yeah.
They're highlighting the body in a way that's very specifically designed to appeal to men.
You can't deny that element of it.
Definitely. And the choreography, too. Like you said, it's this blend of athleticism, but also
Yeah, there are some very suggestive movements in there.
yeah, it's interesting. They're navigating this line between girl next door
An
and
object of desire.
yeah, exactly. It's a very carefully constructed performance.
And, one of our sources talks about this cheerleader, Reeve Weaver. She was a devout Christian, and she really struggled with this aspect of being a DCC.
Oh, wow. I remember reading about her. She talked about feeling really conflicted about the calendar shoots.
Yeah, she participated in them.
Yeah.
But it was clearly something that she wrestled with, given her personal beliefs.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, can you have genuine empowerment in a system that's also objectifying you?
Right.
Is it really about women owning their sexuality? Or is it just playing into a system that profits off of a certain type of femininity?
That's a question that goes way beyond the DCC, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's a bigger cultural conversation
Yeah.
about who gets to define female sexuality and who benefits from it. And
Exactly.
this whole tension between image and reality. It also comes up when you look at the DCC's history with race. They've become more diverse over time,
They have.
but it's been a slow process.
Yeah. And according to our sources, a pretty complicated one.
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember the historical context. The DCC started in a very different time.
Oh, absolutely.
In those early years, the squad was entirely white.
Reflecting the broader societal norms of the time.
Exactly. And even as they started to diversify, that ideal image, like we saw with the dolls, it remained pretty rooted in whiteness.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, does simply having a diverse squad actually translate into equal opportunities for all the members?
Right.
Like, are certain women still being pushed to the margins even within a diverse organization?
That's a good question.
And then some of our sources talk about the audition process and how there's this subtle bias towards Eurocentric features.
Yeah, like even if it's not explicitly stated, there's this preference for a certain look.
And that impacts who makes the cut.
Absolutely.
And we see this play out in some of the personal accounts, where a talented cheerleader of color, despite her skills,
Yeah.
is consistently sidelined.
Yeah, it's like those unspoken rules. They can be just as powerful.
If not more so,
Right.
because they're harder to call out.
And you also see this in the America's Sweethearts documentary, where again, you have a really talented cheerleader of color who's repeatedly passed over, even though her abilities are undeniable.
Wow. It's like these biases are so ingrained
Yeah, they're insidious.
that even when there aren't explicit rules in place, the system still finds ways to privilege certain types of beauty. It makes you think, even if the DCC is diverse on paper, is there true equality within the organization? Or is it more about optics than actual change?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it's like, are they truly committed to diversity and inclusion? Or is it just a way to appease a certain audience?
Right. Like, are they just trying to project a certain image?
Exactly. It's a fascinating question. And it kind of leads us to our next big point, which is the whole idea of the DCC as a business.
Right.
Like they are selling a product, a very carefully crafted image.
And for decades, that image has been very specifically white.
Yeah.
And very specifically aligned with a certain body ideals.
So even as society changes, there's a lot of resistance
There is.
to letting go of that image.
Yeah, because it's been so successful for them.
Right. It's like they're trying to have it both ways
Yeah.
to appear progressive and inclusive, but also to hold on to the image that's made them so much money.
And that tension, it's something that a lot of organizations struggle with.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, how do you balance the need for change with the desire to maintain your brand identity?
Yeah.
It's a tough question.
And the DCC's journey really highlights how complicated it can be.
Yeah.
And, speaking of complicated, we have to talk about the irony of this whole situation. Like, these women are expected to be hypersexualized, but they aren't fairly compensated for it.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's one of the most jarring things about this whole thing.
It really is. And it's a pattern that we see in a lot of industries where women's bodies and images are used for profit.
Oh, absolutely.
But the women themselves, they don't see a fair share of those profits,
Right.
like in this case. They're generating huge revenue for the franchise.
Yeah, through merchandise sales,
Yeah.
TV appearances, all of that.
But they're paid a pittance.
And often without basic benefits or protections.
Yeah. It's just not.
It's a classic example of exploitation.
It is. And it's not just about the money either.
Yeah.
It's about the message it sends.
Yeah.
Like it tells these women that their value lies primarily in their appearance and their ability to perform a certain type of femininity.
It reduces them to objects, commodities,
Right.
rather than seeing them as whole people.
With their own dreams and aspirations.
Exactly.
It's a tough reality check.
It is.
And it makes you wonder, is true empowerment even possible in a system like that?
That's the big question.
It is, and one that I think we're going to keep coming back to as we continue this deep dive.
I think so.
So much to unpack here.
There is.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
We've got a lot more to dig into.
We do. But for now, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to continue our exploration of the Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders.
See us in it.
Nah.
Yeah, it really does seem like that commitment to diversity might be more about appearances than substance.
Yeah.
And, it all ties back into the commercial interest, like we were saying. They're selling a product,
Right.
a very carefully constructed image. And for decades, that image has been very specifically white and aligned with certain body ideals.
It's interesting how the DCC almost acts as like a microcosm of the broader American culture. Like you see this same tension play out in so many areas, Hollywood, fashion, politics, you name it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why this deep dive is so fascinating to me. We're not just talking about a cheerleading squad here. We're talking about how the DCC reflects and in some ways reinforces these deeper social dynamics.
Yeah, it's like holding a mirror up to our culture, warts and all. And Reeve Weaver's story, it really exemplifies that conflict between personal beliefs and the demands of this image-driven world.
Totally. Her struggle with the sexualized aspects of being a DCC, it really brings us back to this core issue of the commercialization of femininity. We talked
Mm,
about the financial discrepancies,
right.
but there's also this whole emotional labor involved in maintaining that perfect image, that duality that we were discussing.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the pressure to always be on, to
Yeah.
fit into this incredibly narrow mold. It's got to take a toll. Do any of the sources talk about like the long-term impact on these women even after their time with the DCC is over?
Yeah, several of the former cheerleaders actually speak to that in their personal accounts. They talk about the pressure to maintain a certain weight, the constant scrutiny of their appearance, the need to project a specific type of personality. It can be really damaging to their self-esteem and body image.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even in a seemingly glamorous world like the DCCC, the focus on appearance can have some real lasting consequences. But, Reeve Weaver's story also got me thinking about this idea of reclaiming femininity. Like, if the DCC's version of femininity is so problematic, then what does a healthy, empowering version look like?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And I don't think there's one easy answer.
Right.
It's different for every woman.
Yeah. It's not about fitting into someone else's mold. It's about finding what works for you and owning it.
Exactly. It's about agency, authenticity,
Yeah.
and valuing yourself for who you are, not for how you look or perform for others.
Totally. And, thinking about the DCC's evolution over time, and particularly their struggles with racial inclusion, it makes me think about the women of color who were pioneers on the squad. They face so much pushback, both overt and subtle.
Hmm.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear. And even when doors open, the playing field isn't necessarily level.
Yeah, it's a powerful example of how individual experiences can really highlight those larger systemic issues.
Yeah.
Having a few women of color on a squad doesn't automatically erase decades of ingrained biases and cultural norms.
Right.
It's not a quick fix.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a deep wound.
Exactly.
You can have diverse representation on the surface.
Yeah.
But if those women are still being sidelined, if their beauty isn't reflected in the merchandise or marketing, if they're not given equal opportunities, then it's just window dressing.
Precisely. And it all circles back to the DCCs as a business.
Right.
They're selling a product, an image. And for a long time, that image was very specifically white, very specifically tied to a certain type of traditional beauty.
And even as society changes, there's a lot of resistance to letting go of that.
There is, because it's what's familiar. And let's be honest, it's what's profitable.
It's like they're trying to have it both ways, to appear progressive and inclusive while still clinging to the image that's been so successful for them.
Mm-hmm.
But that tension, it ultimately undermines the message of empowerment they're trying to project.
You're absolutely right. And that tension is something that so many organizations struggle with.
Yeah.
How do you balance the need for change with the desire to maintain your brand identity and your audience?
It's a tough one.
It's a delicate dance. And the DCC's journey really highlights how complicated it can be.
Totally. And speaking of complicated, let's talk about the irony of how these cheerleaders are expected to be hypersexualized,
Okay.
but aren't fairly compensated for the labor that goes into constructing and maintaining that image.
Right. It's one of the most jarring contradictions. And again, it's a pattern we see repeated in so many industries, where women's bodies and images are used for profit, but the women themselves aren't seeing a fair share of those profits.
Like, the sources really lay this bare. They cite specific examples of how the DCC profits from the image and labor of its cheerleaders, from merchandise sales to television appearances, while the cheerleaders themselves are paid a pittance, often without basic benefits or protections.
It's really disheartening.
It is. And it raises all these questions about fairness,
Well,
about power dynamics,
Yep.
and about the true cost of this type of entertainment.
absolutely. And it's not just about the money.
No.
It's about the message it sends. It tells these women that their value lies primarily in their appearance and their ability to perform a certain type of femininity.
Exactly.
It reduces them to objects, to commodities,
Right.
rather than recognizing them as whole, complex human beings.
With their own dreams, aspirations, needs.
Yes.
It's a pretty harsh reality check, and it makes
Wow.
you wonder if true empowerment is even possible in a system that simultaneously objectifies and undervalues you.
It's a tough question to answer, and I
Uh-huh.
think it's one that each individual has to wrestle with. But I think our deep dive into the DCC, it really highlights the importance of critically examining the systems we're a part of, the messages we're bombarded with, and the choices we make.
So what does this all mean for the average person? What are the takeaways from this deep dive?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that things are rarely as simple as they seem. We tend to see the GCC through this lens of glamour and entertainment, but when you dig a little deeper, when you peel back the layers, you start to see all the complexities, the power dynamics, the ways in which these women are both empowered and exploited.
It's definitely a case of don't judge a book by its cover. And it challenges us to think critically about the images we consume, the messages we internalize about beauty and femininity, like who's profiting from those images and at what cost?
Precisely. It's not enough to just passively consume entertainment. We need to be active viewers, active consumers, questioning the narratives we're being fed,
Yeah.
and considering the broader implications of what we're seeing.
That's a powerful message. It's a call to action for all of us to be more mindful, more critical, and more engaged with the world around us.
Yeah, it's like we've been handed these rose-colored glasses and we just accept it, but we have to take them off and really look at what's going on. And these deep dives, I think they help us do that.
Yeah, they give us the tools to be more critical,
Exactly.
look beyond the surface.
And it's not just about the DCC.
Right.
It's about applying that critical lens to everything.
To all aspects of our lives.
Advertising, social media, even our personal relationships.
It's about recognizing those power dynamics, those unspoken messages.
Yeah, like it's everywhere once you start to see it.
It really is.
We were talking earlier about what a truly empowered femininity looks like, especially in contrast to the DCC's version. And I think a big part of it is recognizing that it's not one size fits all.
Oh, absolutely not.
Like there's no single definition.
It's about recognizing that each woman's journey is unique. Her definition of empowerment is personal.
Right. It's her own. Exactly. To say there's one right way to be feminine is ridiculous.
Totally misses the point.
Completely.
It's about letting go of those expectations, those stereotypes that society tries to impose on women.
And finding your own voice.
Yeah.
Your own strength.
Yes. Defining what femininity means to you,
Exactly.
not to anyone else.
And celebrating that diversity.
Yeah.
Recognizing that beauty comes in a million different packages.
A million different packages. That's a good way to put it. This whole conversation has really got me thinking about something else. We talk a lot about the male gaze and how it shapes the DCC's image. But what about the female gaze?
Oh, that's a great point.
Like, what role do women play in perpetuating these narrow ideals of beauty and sexuality?
Yeah, I think that's a question that often gets overlooked. We tend to focus on the male gaze as the primary source of objectification.
Right?
But women are just as much a part of this system.
We internalize those messages. We
Yeah.
compare ourselves to each other, and sometimes we judge other women based on those same narrow standards.
Absolutely. It's like we've been conditioned to view ourselves and each other through this distorted lens.
And that's something we need to change. Like, we need to be more aware of it, more intentional about breaking free from those patterns.
Yes.
It's about celebrating each other's strengths, recognizing the unique beauty in every woman.
I love that. Shifting the focus from competition to collaboration.
Yeah.
From tearing each other down to building each other up.
And maybe that's the most valuable takeaway from this whole deep dive. It's a reminder that true empowerment starts with us.
It does. It starts with how we view ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
how we treat each other, and how we challenge those limiting beliefs about what it means to be a woman.
Recognizing that we are all works in progress, that we all have our own struggles and insecurities.
And that's okay.
It is.
It's about embracing our imperfections,
Yeah.
our individuality, and finding strength in our collective journey.
Beautifully said. So, to our listener, we leave you with this. What does femininity mean to you? How can you challenge those narrow definitions and embrace a more authentic, more empowering version of yourself?
And how can you extend that same grace and acceptance to the women around you? How can we work together to create a culture where every woman feels seen, valued, and empowered to be her true self?
That's a great question to ponder. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and complex world of the Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders. We hope you learned something new, or at least that it sparked some interesting thoughts. And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.